This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. This video is going to serve two purposes. So in addition to it being what it's mainly going to be, which is a rewatch of a recap of my rewatch of the Browns Week 17 game versus the New York Jets from 2023. This will also be my reaction to the Browns trading a 6th-round pick for Nick Harris. Now, I think this is in reaction to Luke Whippler going down for what presumably seems like at least an amount of time that will put him on injured reserve, if not the whole year. He got rolled up on pretty bad in that game. So best case scenario, it's a bad high ankle sprain. Worst case scenario, it's something he needs surgery for and will be gone from the team for this year for. Luke Whippler was set up to be the backup center for the Cleveland Browns. So the Browns decided to make a move to bring back their old backup center, Nick Harris, to kind of fill that role. They spent a 6th-round pick. Which 6th-round pick hasn't been specified. The Browns have 3 6th-round picks in next year's draft. And I mentioned this during the draft that the Browns were going to have to get rid of some of those 6th and 7th-round picks that they have because they just have too many. They're not going to roster 5 or 6 6th and 7th rounders next year. So it'd be good to use those picks for players that you're planning on rostering. So that is what's going on with the Nick Harris trade. You can expect that he will do some fullback stuff like he did last year. He will be the backup center and probably the first call to be somebody who's tackle eligible, if not it being the loser between the whole Jack Conklin and DeJuan Jones situation. If you're asking me what I think about the trade, I think it's a good move. The Browns get a 7th-round pick in Nick Harris back, and the Seahawks get a 6th-round pick for a player that was going to be a backup center to him. I think both teams got value. Maybe the Seahawks thought that he might not make the roster, given what they do. Either way, the Browns get back a player they're familiar with. They don't have to teach them all the new things, and I think they prefer that about having him as a backup to the center. So that's good. If you know that the Browns have to go into the season, they'll have a veteran, well, not a veteran, he's not a veteran, but a qualified backup center. So you can no longer be worried about that as the time goes on. So that's the Nick Harris trade. Let's get into the rewatch of the Browns Week 17 contest versus the New York Jets. This game was to clinch the Browns' playoff berth and to clinch the 5th seed for the Cleveland Browns in the 2024 playoffs. And this game was probably the most memorable game. Well, not most memorable game. One of the most memorable games of the season, of a very memorable season. And it's a game that we remember for David Njoku having like 1,000,000 yards in the first quarter. And he balled. He had 6 receptions for 134 yards. I believe those were all in the first half. After that, they basically bracketed David Njoku for the rest of the game, and then Elijah Moore went out, so even more attention went over to David Njoku. Basically, they were not going to let David Njoku get 260 yards right after Amari Cooper got 200 and something yards. They were going to do something about it in this game, and they did. Some things I want to get into before I get into a specific breakdown of this game. Love that they made the elf at midfield in this game wear all white like the Browns were. This is one of the Browns' whiteout games. They did this whenever they played a whiteout game at home. I believe they did the same thing for the San Francisco one. Love the whiteout elf. The attempt at a whiteout crowd was pretty sad. Like, now that we're away from it, we know that the Browns made a big effort to get the whiteout going. I don't know if they gave shirts out for everybody. I feel like I remember them announcing that they were going to give out shirts, but I don't know if this was one of those deals where they left the shirt on every seat, because that's usually how you do this. You leave a shirt, a white shirt on every seat. Or if it's one of those things where you're like, we're going to give a white shirt to the first 20,000 people who walk through the door. They did that, and that's not a good plan. Either way, this whiteout did not work. It was not a whiteout. It was whiter than what the Browns crowd usually gets into. And please do not clip that bit out of context. The crowd had more white shirts on than usual. It's a better way to put it. But it wasn't a whiteout. It's a pretty sad attempt at a whiteout. And the team, if they didn't give the jerseys out on the seats, they got it, not the jerseys, but the shirts out on the seats. You got to do it. You got to do it. You just got to do it. Like, that's how you get a whiteout. Especially for a professional sport where that's not something that's as common. You want to have that happen, you got to give away the shirt, and you got to put it on every seat. And this is something that other teams have done. So I'm not sure if the Browns did or did not do that. I would think they did, but if you went to that game, you could tell me better what happened. Also, here's another thing that makes it difficult to have a whiteout. In December in Cleveland. It's December in Cleveland. Now, not only is white the least heat, like it keeps the less heat in, right? So things that keep you warm usually aren't white. So that's difficult. It's hard to put a winter apparel outfit together that's white. And then two, even if you give out this little white shirt, it's going to be impossible to fit that white shirt over like a jacket and some overalls. Like it's just too difficult. If you want to do the whiteout, you got to do that early in the year, right? When people are wearing t-shirts and regular clothes. Doing it in December, I think they learned some hard lessons because that was not a whiteout in that crowd. But that aside, I think something else that is actually important to how the game played out is that aside, I think something else important to how the game played out was that the field was in rough shape. And when we talk about natural grass fields versus turf, I think we have a very idealized version of natural grass fields that we talk about. Because natural grass fields in a regular 70-degree environment are always going to be better than turf. But football is not played in perfect weather conditions for the most part outdoors where natural grass sits. And one of the issues with natural grass is that it can deteriorate. And the Browns grass just deteriorates as the season goes on. And that's not because the grounds crew isn't good or that they're being cheap on the grass. That's just because of the reality of growing grass in Cleveland, Ohio. There's going to be snow. There's going to be freezing cold temperatures. There's not going to be a ton of sun out during the day. All of those things make it hard to maintain grass well enough to play quality football on. So you end up with the field that, despite as much money as you can throw at it, being thrown at it, just does not look great by the end of the year. And I think that's something that's left out of a lot of natural grass turf conversations. And when you look at teams like New York or teams like Buffalo, who even have outdoor stadiums with turf, yeah, it's because the owner is cheap, but also there are other reasons on top of that why the cold weather outdoor cities would have turf instead of natural grass. Cincinnati even does it because the field, you can have the same field condition all year versus something like with the Browns where, you know, if the Browns want to have a very finesse game plan or a very like tight game plan with like footwork and everything, that was going to be difficult to do because there was no traction on that field. There's downsides to turf. There's downsides to natural grass is my point. And this game was like evidence of one of the downsides of natural grass. The foot I mean, not the field surface itself just wasn't great. And that's just going to be something that the Browns are going to have to deal with as they hope to play deeper into December and January, hopefully at home. And we'll see if that becomes a bigger talking point or a bigger point of conversation between Browns fans as it becomes more and more relevant. It's been irrelevant for a while with the Browns, how the field looks late in the season, but I feel like the Browns are at the point now to where we're going to care about how that field holds up over the year. And there's only so much you could do with a natural grass field outdoors in Northeast Ohio, especially when you're next to a lake. It's just not the greatest conditions for growing Kentucky bluegrass. That being said, the first thing I want to say about this game is I thought that Jerome Ford had a forgotten masterpiece in this one. I thought this was his best game from a burst standpoint, from a consistency standpoint, from a vision standpoint. Like, he made cuts and saw holes there that good running backs do. He was really effective in pass protection. He was effective as a wide receiver, super effective as a wide receiver. Actually had 2 touchdowns in this game. This is the hope for what Jerome Ford could be in the future. Somebody who can get 12 carries, get you 4 or 5 10-yard bursts in a good game, and then be a factor as a wide receiver in empty or in late down situations. Like, if Jerome Ford could be this, then the Browns will be cooking with gas when it comes to complementing him with Nick Chubb. So when I talk about Jerome Ford being somebody who could be a complementary back to what Nick Chubb does, this is the blueprint for him. This is what makes me believe this is possible, and this is how he can achieve it and how he's already done that in the NFL, and why that makes me have some confidence in his ability to do that on a consistent basis if he just wasn't asked to be the feature back. He's not a feature back. This is what his future is, and I hope that the Browns double down on that, and Jerome Ford doubles down on that, because I think there's a really good role for a guy like him in this offense, right? Look what he did with 12 carries and a couple receptions. This is the kind of damage that Jerome Ford can do if he's put in the right spots to be successful and not overexposed. David Njoku, as we know in this game, went off. I think that does not need to be explained. But one of the things I think is interesting about how David Njoku went off kind of visibly in this game is, and that is, I think, one of David Njoku's underrated abilities. He is one of the best sellers as a tight end. He can sell you on the fact that he's blocking when he's not. He can sell you on a route. He does a great job of selling when he's out there. He fakes out the hell out of CJ Mosley in this game for a huge game. And that's because he just puts so much attention to detail in selling, and he's so good at it. And I think that's why you see a lot of these plays where it looks like everybody forgot about David Njoku. And that's not by accident with David Njoku. That's because David does some of the best selling of any tight end in the NFL, and it really does a good job of fooling people while they are out there. So kudos to David Njoku. I think he does a great job selling these routes, selling these concepts, selling these fakes, selling these screens. That's one of his best skills. And when you add that on top of his athletic ability, you can see why the ceiling is the roof for him. All right, let's talk about Joe Flacco in this game. I thought in the first quarter, there were clear examples of Joe Flacco hitting 7s on the slot machine in the first quarter at least, because I would not describe the decision-making, or at least not, I'm not saying all the decisions he made, but some of the decisions he made were more lucky than good, right? There was a throw to David Njoku that was high. Well, not high. It was just high enough, but it was a really dangerous throw. And it was behind David. But luckily, it was to David Njoku, so he turns around, grabs it, catches it, makes a big play. But it almost got intercepted, and it probably should have been intercepted. Another play here happened, I think, very early in the second quarter, where he throws this ball to Elijah Moore, and that should have been a pick six, but for whatever reason, the DB does not catch it. It bounces into the air, and then Elijah Moore catches it. So some of that was going on with Joe Flacco in this game for sure. He threw a pick six off a deflection that seemed like it could get the New York Jets back into the game, but it never ended up happening. Again, if we're talking about forgivable points, the Browns gave up, maybe 14 forgivable points as a defense. But all in all, I thought Joe Flacco was pretty solid in this game. I thought when I watched this the first time that this was his best game as a Brown. I don't think that anymore. I think that the other games are a little bit more impressive than he was in this one. But I do think he made some plays throwing on the run. I think he made some plays out of structure that were pretty impressive in this one. And I think he was at his best when he was allowed to improvise just a little bit. I think that's when Joe Flacco was at his best. He got a lot of people to make plays for him, and I think that is something that's important to look at, because some quarterbacks don't put their guys in position to make plays enough, and they play a little bit too safe. Sometimes you would prefer somebody like Joe, who is a little bit on the other end of that spectrum. Another player I thought played super well, speaking of, is Elijah Moore. Thought Elijah Moore had himself a good game here, but also a really strong end to his 2024. And as I watch it, I get more encouraged about what he could look like in 2024-25 going on. So I'm excited about Elijah Moore. I think he's super underrated coming into this season, because so many people are focused on Jerry Jeudy and Amari Cooper, and will they bring in CeeDee Lamb, or will they trade for Brandon Ayuk? All of these things kind of factor into it, and it seems like Elijah Moore feels like last year's toy more than like somebody like a Cedric Tillman does. And I think he's kind of getting forgotten about, but I think the Browns have plans for him. And I think he's going to have a nice year this year if the end of his 2024 is anything to indicate on it. Defensively, and this is something that did pop into my mind while watching the defense, is we don't talk enough about how the injuries affected the defense as the season went on. We talk a lot about how that happened for the offense, because the offense was mainly affected by those injuries. But the defense had a lot of its depth shrunk because of the injuries that the Browns had, right? You lose Obo, you lose Maurice Hurst, you have guys in the secondary in and out on a weekly basis. Sometimes Juan's playing, sometimes Juan's not. And then you have a bunch of guys banged up. And it's obvious in this game and in every game since week 10 that the Browns defense, since they lost the significant amount of players, just lost the amount of juice that they had earlier in the season. So I think that has a lot to do with why the road home splits. I talked about that in the video, where I think it's more about the injuries that progressed as the year went on for the defense. And in this game, I saw it was probably the most obvious to me, where I'm like, okay, this is a defense that looks beat down and a little bit tired. They're still very good, and the Jets are very bad on offense. They're starting Trevor Siemian, but Trevor Siemian still had like 261 yards of passing. I think Breece Hall had a clean 13 carries, 84 yards. And like, they were able to move the ball in ways that I don't think they would have been able to move the ball if the Jets played the Browns in September or October. But post-October, the Browns had so many injuries stack up defensively at that point to where they were a little bit of a weaker unit. Still strong, still only gave up, 13 true points in this game. But I don't even think they would give up that much if it weren't for a lot of the injuries that they had along the line. I mean, you had a banged up Myles Garrett as well. He had that shoulder injury issue going on. Denzel Ward in and out the lineup. Same thing with Greg Newsome. Same thing with Martin Emerson. I think it did take its toll on this team. But that's my thoughts on the Browns Week 17 matchup. Next time I'll talk to you, we'll be talking about the Browns wild card game, at least about the recap. So I'm excited about that. Let me know if you're excited in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.